There are a lot of laws that tell us what we can and cannot do. The Constitution is a document that identifies what government can and cannot do.
May 11th, 2020, Season 2, Episode 9 of the Barney and Clyde Show. Our segments today are the fine line between grandstanding and caring, the ginned-up outrage over the Department of Education putting Title IX campus rape allegations on a due process footing, particularly when that outrage comes from Joe Biden, the state and the individual in a time of pandemic. And we're going to talk about Shelly Luther, the owner of the Dallas, Texas Hairstyling Salon, who recently spent a few days in jail before being sprung by the Texas Attorney General, Governor, and Lieutenant Governor. Maybe someday we'll try a free market. That's one of our favorites. Today, in that segment, we're going to look at Thomas Massey's Prime Act, which would be a great way to prevent a meat shortage during this situation. And then our fourth is another new segment that I think we'll be doing from time to time. My Kid's Noggin is not government property. We're going to look at Elizabeth Bartholet, the Harvard professor behind the now canceled homeschooling conference.
So everyone who might be new to the Barney and Clyde podcast, the point of our show is that Barney is a conservative and I'm a libertarian. There's a lot of Venn diagram overlap between those two things, especially around free market economics and individual freedom and sovereignty. Basically, Barney and I come down to the conclusion that that human freedom is the most paramount situation for human flourishing, and we tend to differ on our Venn diagram on matters of foreign policy, border controls, and things like that. But they're always riveting conversations that we have, and always thought-provoking, and I hope that you would join those. Send your emails to barneyandclydeshow@gmail.com or get a hold of us otherwise and get in on the conversation. Mm-hmm. And get in on the libation. We always have some kind of delicious beverage. Usually we're at the libation station in Barney's basement. But since we've been social distancing, we've got to be apart, so chances are we have something different. Today I've got Good and Gather unsweetened cucumber mint sparkling water.
That sounds tasty.
It actually is quite tasty. It's very bracing for something of its daytime compatibility.
Yeah. As Clyde says, we've been social distancing for the last few episodes, but customarily we meet at the libation station and deliver this fortnightly and forthrightly. And if it's the daytime, Clyde, he's good at picking these things out, like what he's drinking today. He's got various teas and fruit drinks and things like that, and root beer type drinks. And if it's a little closer to evening, sometimes we'll have something a bit more spirituous. But just a quick tour here. I'm sitting at the cockpit, the nerve station, the nerve center, where it all happens for all. But here's the other side of the bar. This is the opposite view of the libation station, where under normal circumstances we meet. And I
really miss the libation station. I gotta admit, I can't wait to be back up.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite spots in Casa del Pronto. But that's the premise, yes. And we're now in season 2. We've been doing this well over a year, and our audience has grown, and we're glad you're part of it. And so welcome aboard.
So introduce us to your beverage, and then we'll into our first segment.
Yes, I forgot. Yeah. Spark is a product. It's under the Advocare brand. That's a brand, a line of fitness and wellness products, and they got all kinds of things for various aspects of your fitness and wellness. This is their energy drink, and it comes in powder form that you stir up in water. And disclaimer, Advocare is not a sponsor of the B&C show. They probably ought to be, since we're growing by leaps and bounds.
Yeah. Sign up. Hit us up on Facebook.
Exactly. But Spark, I often have it before a training session at the gym or a vigorous bike ride or something like that. And
I'm going to have to get back into that or try some of that when we get back into the gym. I haven't been in 6 weeks, so starting to get
You
a
doing
little,
home workouts? I am.
a
Yeah.
little bit, but I've been
Push-ups and
kind of
crunches and small weights and
using
all
the excuse to be a little lazy and
that.
get
Okay.
fat again. So,
But anyway, so I'm having Spark, and you're having cucumber mint sparkling water. Very
yeah.
nice.
All right.
Okay. Well, we got these 4 segments and lots to cover in each of them. So let's just start into it. This first segment is one that it's a segment category we've had for some time. The fine line between grandstanding and caring. We were discussing before the show that there's another segment we often do called the hyperbolic chamber. And this could easily have fit under that too, for reasons that will become apparent in a few minutes. The Department of Education had, up until 2011, treated accusations of sexual harassment, sexual assault, up to and including rape, due process matter, because it's a crime. And then during the Obama administration, the Department of Education sent out a Dear Colleague letter, and we're going to have that available for you as a reference. We got a few things that we're going to have share as reference as you go over that. Go over this segment or this today's episode. And this Dear Colleague letter, it compelled schools to conduct sexual misconduct inquiries like kangaroo courts or show trials. There you go. And we'll have that available for you. The students were stripped of their ability to face accusers or call witnesses or see evidence against them. And it came along and it fed into this whole believe all women thing that and now, okay, let's bring it up to the present. Last week, the Department of Education put Title IX verbiage about this back on more of a due process footing.
They sort of rolled back some of the regulations that were put in 2011, I think.
And the hyperbole hurled at Betsy DeVos over it has just been off the charts. Catherine E. Lamon, the chairwoman of the United States Commission on Civil Rights, which is, the body, the agency that's charged with ensuring the constitutional rights, that all our constitutional rights are equally protected. And she accused DeVos of taking us back to the bad old days when it was permissible to rape and sexually harass students with impunity. No, it's just seeing that two things. One, that college students accused of such things are get their due process in a court of law just like anybody else would. And B, that really this Catherine E. Lamon ought to understand that it actually makes sure that we treat sexual assault with the same seriousness that we do other felony crimes like armed robbery and murder and things like that.
Right.
So
I think if you are taking it seriously, you have to go through some kind of due process. You have to give everyone our American due process, because if you don't, eventually that's going to rise to the top. These people getting falsely accused, those people continually going to jail is not going to sit well with people, and eventually that's going to bubble over. They're going to stand for it.
Now, with regard to the Biden angle, I don't want to go too far. Certainly he's being a hypocrite, but I don't want to go too far down that road because we don't know if he's guilty of this or not. This Tara Reade's allegations are getting looked at right now, but accusing a man, you can ruin a man's reputation and career and life real fast with a false allegation of this stuff. And ask the Duke lacrosse team or that fraternity on the University of Virginia campus about which a Rolling Stone article was written, full of lurid tales of rape rooms and stuff that turned out to be entirely untrue. There are a few things you got to be more careful about than such allegations. That you got to meet a real high standard of proof for that.
Yeah.
the other side of the coin is, and you said this before, a woman has every right to accuse, say that I was violated, I was assaulted, I was, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you have to take that seriously. And I think all women should be believed, and absolutely. But there's got to be a process to we have a presumption of innocence in the American legal system, and if that's not followed, it sets a precedent that it cannot be followed in other matters. And I think that loosening that restriction in this case is a really slippery slope. But I understand the desire to do that by some people, but I think that they don't realize where they're going with it. I think that, and at this point, you brought up Duke lacrosse and some other things, but at this point, you there's been so many false allegations that have been proven that you can't just not investigate these matters. You can't ruin somebody's life and career based on speculation or based on an accusation. You have to have witnesses. You have to have evidence. You have to have at least a formal hearing of some kind. So there's this resource here. I got this from globalcitizen.org, and they had linked to a Twitter thread by this Know Your Nine outfit here. And it's basically, it seems like their mission is to discredit Betsy DeVos, and which I don't understand, because they don't realize that this is a product of this organization in general. Like, they're not critical of there being a Department of Education. They're just critical of the person who's heading it at the moment, which is the problem with those types of organizations, that a new head of the organization can cause what they see as such disaster.
Exactly. If the department's mission is a certain mission, then that should have continuity between administrations or whoever's heading up that department.
Right. So anyway, so they put out this sort of meme about what the changes were, and I'm not vouching for them, but the document is 2,000 pages, so I'm definitely not reading that. But their 9-phase meme here, I'm going to skip a couple of them. But one, schools must dismiss any complaints of sexual misconduct that occurred outside of campus-controlled buildings or educational activities. I think that seems reasonable. If the school wasn't involved, then the school's not involved. They shouldn't be a part of these processes unless they're subpoenaed or questioned by law enforcement. 2, colleges must allow live cross-examinations by the representative of each party's choosing, meaning survivors could be questioned by their rapist, family member, friend, or fraternity brother. I'm not really sure how true that is, but it sort of seems consistent with legal defense, that you have the right to appoint your counsel. If this isn't a legal matter, it's just a school matter, then that might be sort of an I don't know, an icky loophole there. But I don't think that that's how anyone would use that stipulation. Okay. So number 3, 60-day timeline removed. Schools can drag students through lengthy investigations. I don't understand that point. They had a 60-day timeline, so you had to bring your allegations in the 60-day window. And I don't think that's a legal matter. I think that's for the school to do anything about it, for the school to investigate into it or take any actions that had to be done within 60 days. Well, the Department of Education has removed that restriction, it appears. So that seems to be in the favor of someone who would be accusing someone, right? You can bring that evidence much later. You can bring that charge much later.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand their argument there. So number 4, if you and your perpetrator go to different schools that are not in the same consortium, you can't pursue a case against them. Again, you can pursue a case against them. A legal charge can be brought against that person, but there's no case in your school. What is your school going to do? Your school has no right to kick another person out of school or to fire the faculty of another college. There's nothing for them to do. let's see. Let's skip to number 7. Religious schools can claim Title IX religious exemptions even after they are charged with discrimination. Um, Again, I'm not sure how true that is about the after they're charged with it situation, but if they're exempted because of a religious affiliation or other matter, I mean that should really be a part of your school selection. If you're going to go to a place where you feel safe, you should really be um, weighing that situation in your decision to go to that school or not.
Yeah.
And it kills me that we're still having this conversation about what are the best rules for the Department of Education to impose on these facilities when it's clear that their imposition is unwelcome completely. If that's the power that they wield, if Title IX keeps people safe and the Department of Education has the ability to just unplug it when they have a new director, that seems a little bit of a flawed system, not a flawed person at the helm. Um, and 8, schools' obligation to act against sexual harassment is greatly reduced. They give pretty much nothing as evidence about that.
Yeah, that seems like kind of a drive-by hit job. Yeah.
Yeah, so their obligation to act against sexual harassment is greatly reduced. I'd like to know exactly in what way. Um, Number 9, DeVos's Title IX rule makes it easier for schools to ignore cases of sexual violence and sweep sexual assault under the rug. Her rule says that colleges are only required to act if you tell the right person, like your Title IX coordinator or a dean, which is, to me, really consistent. If they're going to take these situations seriously and they're going to investigate them, then they have to have a process around doing that. Not everyone's life is completely disorganized as many college students' lives are. You have to have a process by which you process any situation. Um, and if they're going to set up the framework in order to prosecute or deal with these people who've commit these offenses, then they've got to have a reporting structure for it, and you're going to have to follow it, I'm afraid.
Uh,
So it seems like a
and it
smear piece
ought to.
against DeVos instead of a legitimate complaint.
Yeah, and that's the thing that it's another case where everything has nowadays has to have an ideological charge on it because Betsy DeVos is involved.
Hmm.
Um, we've got to find fault with putting this thing on a due process footing, and you get um, examples of media bias, like the way it was framed by NBC News. Now, under reworked federal rules, alleged student perpetrators will have added protections, um, including presumption that they are innocent throughout the disciplinary process. That's not an added protection. That's a bedrock principle of American jurisprudence,
Yeah,
of American legal, our American legal system.
absolutely. And what's funny is that Biden was championing um, those restrictions that basically took that due process away, and now he's facing that accusation from a former staffer, and by his own standards, he would be presumed guilty.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Segment 2: the state and the individual in a time of pandemic. We're going to talk about Shelly Luther, the owner of the Dallas, Texas hairstyling salon, and her situation. And I don't know if you heard a little ding go off. I just sent you a link to my post from yesterday about this late
Oh
in the
yeah, I see
day,
it. Yep.
which anybody who's new to the program, I generally at some point tout my blog. I have a blog late in the day, and I post generally daily, sometimes more than daily, about sociocultural, political, economic matters, and so forth. And I've got my post yesterday is about this Shelly Luther situation. Um, okay, there you go. And so we probably ought to run through the basics of the situation. Texas started out with a pretty severe lockdown regime, if you will, and but was Shelly Luther chose to open her salon in violation of it. Within a few, there's a few factors here. The state of Texas had announced that within a few days it was going to start easing up some of the restrictions, and including letting hair salons open at a reduced capacity and so forth. Not like what we're doing here in Indiana. And she was within a few days of that. But she went to one of these rallies where, the gist of why the people had rallied was open everything up right now. And she tore her the document saying you need to cease and desist and close your salon back up right now. She tore it up in front of the crowd and everybody cheered and so. I noticed you're kind of grinning. Yeah, you kind of dig that.
Yeah.
Good on you, Shelly.
Yeah, seriously.
All right.
There's no doubt in my mind that this woman is a hero.
Okay. There we go. We're maybe starting to veer outside the Venn diagram overlap here, because there's a few other considerations. Okay, and you're approaching that from the hard and fast principle of a person's right to conduct business, and what is a darn virus? Where does a darn virus get off changing that? Yeah.
Well,
okay.
Maybe I could elaborate my position here in a minute,
right, sure.
But I don't want to be pigeonholed into that particular place. But it has nuances of that. But proceed.
Oh well, okay. So then there's the question of why she didn't have some support from friends, family, or loyal clients. Hairstylists in particular tend to have particularly supportive customers who have a vested interest in seeing that their favorite salons make it through challenging times. If I may wax anecdotal for a minute, my wife's a stylist and salon owner, and her clientele has not only stepped up in this present situation, but rose to the occasion during a couple of surgeries in recent years that necessitated her being off for a while. And since this brouhaha, a GoFundMe account's raised several thousands of dollars for Luther and her business. And then there's the matter of Ted Cruz seeking out Luther for a haircut last weekend, which makes perfect sense to me. I mean, it's a political no-brainer. He's a guy who has stood for freedom. The reason I supported him up till the bitter end in 2016 was because of his 5 for Freedom. He named 5 federal cabinet level departments he would get rid of, and several freestanding agencies. And and so he's, it makes sense for him politically to get in there and get a haircut from Shelly Luther, because he's standing. It allows him to publicly stand for freedom.
Right, but didn't he wait till after it was legally opened again before he did that?
Sure. Yeah.
I'd rather have seen him,
do it before,
whip the thing up with her.
All right.
But whatever.
Well,
good for him.
Let's kind of use Shelly Luther and Texas and all that to expand the scope a bit. And because Indiana's got this 5-stage plan, and if numbers of hospitalized cases keep going down every 2 weeks, we move to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage, and we'll have by July 4th, Indiana is supposed to be pretty much completely reopened. You have a problem with that?
I have a problem with government central planners telling wealthy businesses they can stay open and individual people that they must close. I think that people
which is a principle that's going to come up in another segment here when we talk about the Primax, the big businesses that are in cahoots with the government operate by a different set of rules from.
That's right. Yeah. So small business people, middle class people, we get to take all the hit and we get to pay all the bills. So lucky us. So the reason I call this woman a hero, and I'm not saying that every business should open their doors fully and that the floodgates should come out and and that there should be no social distancing. I think you should do that. I think you should take careful measures to do that. You and I are doing that now.
Yeah.
We don't have to. I could come over to the libation station, but we're we're taking this seriously. But I don't know how Texas law works. I'm assuming it's like Indiana law, but she is a cosmetologist. She has to have a license. This is a licensed professional, and the entire point of one having to get that license is the fact that they have to, prove that they know how to properly sterilize the equipment, how to use chemicals properly without making noxious combinations or concentrations. And that tells me what I've always suspected, and that's that the government that requires these certifications, they don't even believe in their own effectiveness.
Good
Because
point.
this is a
Yeah,
person
good point there, buddy.
who could be in one room with one other person wearing PPE, personal protective equipment, who's used to sanitizing the combs and that kind of stuff. So the government, if it's going to have a role at all, could have handed her a paper that said, here are some precautions that we suggest you take when dealing with clients. Be one-on-one, use a face mask, have a face mask on the client when possible, or even if it's a mandate, just like your new rules for cosmetology are appointments only. Make sure that you sanitize these things in this way and follow these
One client
rules.
one client at a time in the space and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Which is, yeah.
but to tell the lady that she can't feed her family for an indefinite period, to have no end in sight, and to give her a measly, where's she, Dallas? $1,200
Yeah.
isn't paying for anything for a month in Dallas. That's not
No.
even. That's probably not even her rent or her mortgage.
Yeah.
Not one
And
time.
and one thing I think we can both definitely agree on is that this Judge Eric Moy behaved like a total bonehead. I mean,
Yeah.
sending this woman to jail.
Oh yeah.
And the governor and the lieutenant governor and the attorney general all saw that and said, "No, we're not going to have her served."
Well, because they understand the Constitution, and the Constitution, the very first amendment, the very first part of the Bill of Rights is the First Amendment. You have the right to peaceful assembly. No one can take that away from you. That's a right guaranteed to you, or given to you by your Creator, and guaranteed by the Constitution. And the Constitution it's unlike other laws, right? There are a lot of laws that tell us what we can and cannot do. The Constitution is a document that identifies what government can and cannot do. It cannot do this. This is a violation of your First Amendment right. They cannot do this. A governor, a state governor can't tell you that you can't peacefully assemble.
Yeah.
That's a violation of your constitutional rights.
Yeah, I like what you had to say about what the uniqueness of the Constitution. That was my of our founders. My favorite, my hero is James Madison, who was the principal architect of the Constitution. And the point was to very clearly outline the scope of government. Here's how big and how powerful and it can be, and here's what it can do, and nothing more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. And again, the pandemic situation, it's pretty bad, and people need to be taking the proper precautions. I have respiratory issues. I went to the hospital last October with a septic infection from pneumonia. I have chronic respiratory problems, and I don't want this thing. Like, this is bad news. But I also think that even as libertarian as I am, I don't think that the government has any legal precedence to require people to social distance. That being said, I think people should be doing that. And I probably wouldn't raise hell about it if they had a measured response that applied to everybody. But right now, Kroger and Costco and Walmart and Amazon and Lowe's and Home Depot and Rural King and Target and all these giant big box stores that the people with, or the entities with money who could probably ride out a few months of no business, are allowed to be open, but I won't mention local names, but like our local restaurants can't be open. They can't even be open at a reduced capacity for dine-in. We can't have a local clothing store be open where where one could easily take social distancing measures, keeping face masks on, gloves on, it'd be so much easier to sanitize the counter space at a shop that has one customer an hour versus Lowe's or Walmart that has 100 customers go through the checkout lane in an hour. This is just taking middle class money and funneling it up to the top. Makes me sick.
Which kind of prepares us to segue into segment 3.
Yeah, let's do it.
Time yet. Thomas Massey, he's a Republican House of Representatives member from Kentucky. I believe I should have looked him up on Wiki, but from what I've read, I believe he's a farmer.
Yeah, he's got some heads of cattle apparently, but I don't know to what degree he interacts with them.
Okay.
But I also want to be fair and say that this is a bipartisan bill introduced by Republican Thomas Massey and Democrat, I think it's Shelly Pingree. I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, but
it is a bipartisan bill, which makes it all the more interesting to discuss. This brings up the same principle that you were just talking about in the context of the hair salons, in the context of our food supply chain. We've got the big dogs like Smithfield and Tyson.
Mm-hmm.
They're operating by a different set of rules than every town and city has one now. A farmer's market on Saturday morning. We have one in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And you stroll through, and they got family owned. The such and such brothers family beef. And you can buy all kinds of cuts of steak and roast and burgers and they have super high standards. And it's sometimes like organic and grass fed and all that stuff. Let's consider our current situation. We're in a pandemic. Most of these are family owned. They're often staffed by people who are related to each other. They have a vested interest, not only on a business level, but a family level, to keep each other healthy. They're going to take the highest precautions to make sure that they're running a very sanitary operation. And plus, keeping it local keeps the logistics of the whole thing much more efficient. Kroger's sending in the meat from all kinds of far-flung places. Anyway, so this PRIME Act, it stands for Processing Revival and Intrastate Meat Exemption Act. It's been sitting in the House and the Senate for practically a year, and now's the time to move on it. I think we both agree on that. It lifts restrictions on over 1,000 mom and pop meat processing plants that aren't allowed to supply restaurants, schools, hotels, and like I say, you can wander through your Saturday morning farmer's market and load up on stuff from so-and-so brothers meat. Why can't they also be providing your local restaurants and your local supermarkets?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't understand. This is the reintroduction of this bill. Apparently they introduced it once before. But I don't understand why this bill is even needed. Again, not to be too much of a zealot, but like the requirement for USDA inspections is absolutely unconstitutional. The 14th Amendment, is it the 14th Amendment that guarantees that anything not explicitly stated in the Constitution is a state matter, or is that the 10th Amendment?
That's the 10th. The 14th is was passed in the mid 1800s, and making sure that everybody, after the Civil War, making sure that everybody equally has the equal to protection clause and that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, I'm going to make an edit there and pick it up like I know what I'm talking about.
No, that's okay.
So the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states that anything that's not expressly stated in the Constitution as a federal matter is left to the states to decide. And there's nothing in there. that I know of that talks about agriculture and meat inspection. So this law basically just sort of brings it back to a more constitutionally sound situation by bypassing the USDA. And the USDA is an entity that really should be bypassed because they don't necessarily know what they're talking about. And I'll show you an example here.
Just real quickly, if I'm not mistaken, the USDA was one of the 5 cabinet level federal departments that in Ted Cruz's list of 5 for freedom that he was going to get do away with.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, so here, let me share this. This is from one of my presentations. You know that I do a wild plants blog and teach classes on utilizing wild plants for food and medicine, stuff like this. Here's the U.S. United States Department of Agriculture website, and here they have a plant here that they've labeled as Daucus carota, Queen Anne's lace. This is what foragers like me call a wild carrot. Okay. It's just like the commercial carrots you buy in the store. Well, it's different variety, but it's the same species, right?
Okay.
Totally edible. But what they have pictured here is poison hemlock, the second most deadly plant in North America. So if someone were to take this picture as gospel, they would find that they think they're eating carrots, and this is a deadly plant. Right. It has distinguishing features, and I can prove that offline to anyone who would care to see that. But and I know that's anecdotal, but people just don't. The USDA has no stake in getting this right. Yeah.
Well,
and there's
excellent point.
There's a farm in Virginia called Polyface Farms. Joel Salatin is a very famous organic farmer. He doesn't have an organic label because that's a government badge of you've paid your bills and jumped through the hoops. He calls it beyond organic. But he had a big fight with the regulators because of the way he was processing chickens. And he had to go through, and he was proving with samples of like bacterial samples, like I'm not making any problems here. This is a good process. And so they were trying to get him to do a different process that would get, not necessarily better results. And so it just goes to show you that the regulators aren't always the experts. A lot of times they're just bureaucrats who are appointed, and they think that they know what's best for everybody. The old food pyramid was a good example of that. Things like that.
Yeah. And to kind of bring things full circle, Representative Massey was recently on a television program where he talked about you're seeing stuff like farmers pouring out milk or shooting.
Yes.
He says, I just heard from a friend, a former employee who lives in Nebraska, that a farm next to their family shot 1,200 pigs yesterday. This is troubling, and I tried to tell the USDA that this was coming. USDA is in denial. They said it's a demand problem, not a supply problem. Well, that may have been the case back when the restaurants shut down, and the demand shifted. But now we're moving into the supply problem. If you're pouring out milk and shooting pigs when people are looking for those products on the supermarket shelf,
right? Or
if you're poor in your local food bank, then something is haywire.
Yeah, fully agreed. People are. Just the idea that the shelves are empty or reduced in stock, it shows you that there is demand for that product, and but so I don't know
that can supply it.
Yeah, but they can't supply it because there's something in between a pig and sausage. There's a whole lot of processing between that, and they're not allowed to do the processing. At least they have to operate at a reduced capacity. So what are they going to do? They've got to, and it costs money to continually feed the animals that you can't sell.
Yes, and the answer to the question of, well, gee, why would that be so, gets back to the principle we talked about in last segment as well as this, that the big dogs in that industry are keep crowding out smaller firms and newcomers, and which Adam Smith addressed this in The Wealth of Nations. He says, properly functioning and moral. Don't forget, Adam Smith was a professor of moral philosophy at the University of Edinburgh. An efficient, a truly properly working and moral free market depends on people overcoming that tendency in human nature to get together and collude and fix prices and crowd competitors out of the market.
Right.
It's got to be a free market. Means everybody gets to try their hand at it if they want to.
Yeah, absolutely right. And this is just, again, another situation where if things like the Prime Act don't get instituted, if people aren't left free to transact how they would, you're going to cause those shortages.
Yeah.
You're going to cause these problems. There's going to be losses of all these cows. There's going to be environmental problems from all those dead animals. There's all kinds of problems that are going to arise from this. And if I guarantee you, there's a market for that meat. Guarantee you.
Yes,
if
absolutely.
You just get it straight to the consumer and get your hands off of it, people are going to buy it up.
Which gets back to a basic principle that you and I have brought up over and over and over again on this show. Freedom is elegantly simple compared to any alternative.
Yeah,
it requires a whole lot less hassle and complication and effort. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, have we beaten that one to death?
I think we've given it a good working over.
Okay.
Okay. And this next one, I kind of wondered if we ought to talk about it, because it's we could have put it. We have an ongoing segment category called old news, where we revisit stuff that's kind of gone off the radar, but there's reason to revisit it, to take another look at it. So this would have fit for that, but we've created a new segment category called, because I think there'll be more opportunities to have content in this segment. My kid's noggin is not government property, and that looks at. Today we're going to look at Elizabeth Bartholet, who is a Harvard professor behind the now canceled homeschooling conference. Now, I haven't. I probably should have dived a little deeper to find out exactly why the conference was canceled. I don't know. Maybe it's pandemic related or something. I'm not real sure. If any of you viewers could chime in and let me know more about that. Why exactly it was canceled. In a week ago, when I was reading, when there was a lot of coverage of it getting canceled, I never got a clear explanation of why. But the conference was. I sent you this too, and we'll put it up as reference for all you folks. A piece from April 24th in City Journal, which is the flagship publication and website of the Manhattan Institute. Harvard versus the family, and the conference was still on when this article came out. But Elizabeth Bartholet, this Harvard law professor, in talking about the conference, and she said that it is a realm of homeschooling is a realm of near absolute parental power, inconsistent with a proper understanding of the human rights of children. The conference has caused a stir on social media owing to a profile of Bartholet in Harvard Magazine, which I think I also sent along to you to put up for reference, from in the May-June issue of Harvard Magazine, The Risks of Homeschooling. And the City Journal piece refers to that a lot. And, to support her claim, Bartholet claims that as much as 90% of homeschoolers are driven by quote unquote driven by conservative beliefs and seek to remove their children from mainstream culture. That's an interesting thing in and of itself. Who's the big arbiter that gets to decide how we define mainstream culture?
Right.
Uh,
And who are you to decide for me what my culture is?
Exactly. But Bartholet's research falls short of supporting this observation. In fact, we know strikingly little about homeschool families. A 2013 review of the academic literature noted that while academics assume that conservative Christians make up the largest subset of them, whether this percentage is 2/3, 1/2, or less is a matter of speculation. To support her claim that as many as 90% of homeschoolers are motivated by conservative Christian beliefs, she cites two primary sources. One is a survey by Cardis Education Group, which she notes reveals 70% of homeschoolers in the religious category versus the non-religious category. But that survey categorizes students as religious homeschoolers if their mother attends church once a month. Bartholet's other source is a survey by the Department of Education, which asked parents about their motivation for homeschooling. Only 16% said religious considerations were of primary importance, compared with 34% who cited safety and 35% who listed academic or special needs considerations. 51% said that religion was important, while 80% said that safety was important. She presents a study to support her concern about academic outcomes, noting that methodologically sound studies of the more successful subsets of homeschoolers also reveal problems. One found that while overall the homeschoolers who took standardized tests did slightly better than public schoolers, there was a huge divergence between homeschoolers receiving structured versus unstructured home education. Those receiving unstructured education, as many homeschoolers do, scored significantly lower. Bartholet, and this I'm quoting from this City Journal article, is distorting the study's conclusions, to put it politely. The researchers found that 2/3 of homeschooled students in their sample who received a structured curriculum did dramatically better than the public school students. Unstructured homeschool student performance was either slightly below or statistically indistinguishable from that of the public school students. And then her co-organizer of the event has declared that the reason parent-child relationships, get this, Clyde, this is definitely within our Venn diagram overlap. Her co-organizer, this James Dwyer, says the reason parent-child relationships exist is that the state confers legal parenthood. It's the state that that's empowering the parents to do anything with the children. To take them home, to have custody, to make any kind of decisions about it. Talk about explicitly putting your agenda out there.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. Your kids are yours because we've granted you the privilege of keeping them. Your overlords have granted you the privilege of keeping your children. Yeah. Aren't they generous?
Real scary stuff.
But they talked about in this perspective of the dangers of homeschooling is the most privileged damn thing I've ever heard. Only a person who was born with a silver spoon in their mouth could possibly have this opinion that's so detached from reality. So they said that this event, this homeschooling summit, was to discuss child rights in connection with homeschooling in the United States with a focus on problems of educational deprivation and child maltreatment that too often occur under the guise of homeschooling in a legal environment of minimal or no oversight. That's what school is for a lot of kids. Like a lot of kids, again, I'm glad that our public school is pretty good, but a lot of kids don't have that same situation. A lot of kids go to a danger zone in a public school where they get bullied, where they get beaten up, where they get sexually abused, where they get a crappy education. This whole thing comes from. Sorry to keep going, but this whole thing comes from the assumption that of course we can all assume that the public school system is perfect and good and always has excellent results, and so homeschooling gets compared to perfection, and public school doesn't get compared to any damn thing.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of minority conservatives, particularly Black conservatives, are very big on the idea that the money should follow the child. If the school that I would be required to send my kid to is like you say, a complete war zone, a complete bastion of chaos, I ought to be able to choose to send my kid, if I arrange for the transportation and so forth, to send my kid to a far better school.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a right. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree, and there's so many examples in history that show where a parent should have um, the control over the culture versus the state. I mean, Nazi Germany is always brought up in every example, and I hate to just be the person that throws it out there, but like you know, they sure could have used a lot of people putting their actual values into their children's minds against the state, right? Um,
Yes.
so it's up to me to decide what my values are and to pass those down to my kids. And if I think that the state or any other entity uh, is bad, then I want to be able to give that to my kids. And it comes down to religion too. I mean, this is slander of Christians. These people just hate Christians, and I really think that the homeschooling parents and the organizations that provide homeschooling materials and those kinds of things, I think they should put together a class action lawsuit to sue Harvard for defamation and slander and libel. And maybe if the public school system wasn't so toxic to and prejudiced against Christians, I mean, who the hell would want to homeschool the if the public school provided a good education, a safe environment, and supported their values, or at least refrained from like constantly belittling their values? I have a hard time believing that most people would choose to homeschool in that case. It's really hard to homeschool. I don't think most people would do that. And I'm sure there are some that would do it, but I think that most people wouldn't choose to if they could just send their kids to a normal school that would, take care of their education and instill good values in them. I don't think they'd be in this mess. This is blowback for how they've treated these people.
Thank you very much. Well, along those lines, the Harvard Magazine article profile of Elizabeth Bartholet, um, and like I say, it's from the May-June issue, and at that when it came out, the conference was still on. The little illustration that at the top of the text, the actual article, shows all these kids playing and running around and skipping rope and so forth in front of a house that is actually 4 books stacked together with another book open to serve as the roof, and shows a little girl in jail bars looking out at all the other kids playing, and the 4 books are reading, writing, arithmetic, and Bible.
Oh no!
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so
God forbid, no pun intended.
Yeah, and all this gets back to we discussed this when we had conservative or libertarian party presidential candidate Jacob Hornberger as our guest last episode. We got into the matter of this education being a common good, like roads or something. No, for the reasons I said, a parent gets about an 18-year window at best.
Yeah.
And it's a very personal thing.
Yeah. And Hornberger said, "I thoroughly reject that notion."
Yeah, I remember. I posed that question. That was his.
But I mean, to be fair, on one hand, you got the graphic of the girl looking out of the jail cell, made of her books. So her homeschool feels like a jail, or she's imprisoned in the ideas and values of her parents or caregivers. But one could easily make that same cartoon of a public school. I mean, again, whereas this situation, this article, this summit comes from the premise that public school is 100% good and homeschooling is 100% bad. They're not wrong that homeschooling is going to be inconsistent, right?
Yeah.
Guess what? School is really inconsistent, very inconsistent.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the pot calling the kettle black situation again. They're not holding the public school to the standards that they're slandering homeschoolers with.
Yeah.
And also, again, to be fair, I know we're running close on time, but again, to
Okay.
be fair, some Christians have certainly made some of this bed that all Christians now get to lie in.
There's some Christians that handle their faith in a very boneheaded manner.
That's true. And I think that, sort of Pareto's law, like the 80-20 rule, 20% of the masses will be responsible for 80% of the outcome, right? Well, I think that 20% of and maybe less of Christians are responsible for all of the mouth flapping that have gotten all Christians in trouble with society at large. But those tend to be powerful people, and the laws were made around that kind of stuff, and people are still angry about marriage equality and those types of rights limitations. And it's going to be hard for the Christian community to dig themselves out of that situation.
Yeah. So we coming up on it here?
Yeah, we got about 1.5 minutes.
Okay. Well, yeah, our viewers are busy people, and we want to respect their time. But we sure thank you for tuning in. As we say, we do this fortnightly and forthrightly. And when there's not a pandemic on, we gather at the libation station, and we always say that you should pull up a stool and pour yourself something bracing and join us to examine the matters on our plate. And you can correspond with us a number of ways. We've got an email address.
Barney and Clyde Show at gmail.com is our current email address. You can also comment on YouTube. You can send us comments on Facebook. You can send us direct messages on Facebook. And you can also send us a video clip. If you want to send us a video clip or an audio clip, by all means, send it to us. We'll play it, even if it's completely against our typical conversation. If you're a far leftist or a Democrat moderate and you think we got something wrong, you want to chime in, go ahead and do it. Send us a note, send us a video clip, send us anything, and we'll look into it and hopefully put it on the show.
Yeah, and we're growing, and I don't mean to just say that to be a braggart, but I'm just gratified that there's interest in how human liberty figures into the national conversation on all the matters on our nation's plate. Somebody's interested in that, and I'm really gratified about that.
Yeah, there's a huge demand for it. So we're trying to shore up the supply side.
There you go.
So send us that information, your comments. You can support us at patreon.com/Barney and Clyde. And if you want to see this thing grow and you want to see more materials, then you can support us, and we'll get more coming out to you. And you can read Barney's blog late in the day. You can subscribe to his Substack newsletter.
Yeah, Precipice is what that's called. Yeah.
Okay, which will all be in the show notes and links.
Okay. Clyde, I think we've solved the world's problems here.
I guess we should remind everyone to stay vigilant about your freedom.
About your freedom.
Well, that's an interesting development.